Company of Heroes 3 is celebrating its second anniversary. 2 years ago, fans of the franchise were excited to experience the brand new Mediterranean front, being promised a replayable sandbox campaign and never seen before units. However, launch was terrible, the game was broken and bug-riddled, its recovery was not fast. Players had to go through game-breaking bugs, horrible balance and the lack of basic features. Meanwhile, Relic struggled to improve the game's reputation, but after much suffering and many updates, is the game finally good? CoH3 is a real-time strategy game. You have a base that makes units, units capture sectors, sectors give you a trickle of resources. Manpower allows you to field units and reinforce squads. Fuel advances your tech and pays for vehicles. Ammunition is for extra firepower and explosions, from naval guns to grenades. Combat is more complex than your typical RTS, units are effective at different ranges, cover helps infantry stay alive for longer, the line of sight mechanic lets you ambush enemies, active abilities can turn the tide of an engagement, and dropping your guard for a second can get your men killed. Conversely, retreating your infantry when in danger keeps them alive and allows them to eventually gain veterancy, resulting in several combat bonuses. When tanks arrive, you better be ready or the game can be over in a single push. And don't think your base is all that safe. Before a match, you equip 3 battle groups and then select one of them in-game. Each one grants you unique abilities, some shaping your playstyle from the early game, others kicking into gear in the late game. These battle group abilities are unlocked with command points, which you get when taking up, building caches or killing enemy units. If you're only familiar with the first 2 games, you might be thinking that it's basically the same thing, and you'd be right. CoH3 is not a radical departure. Relic played it safe, so why do people hate it? Paint this picture. People are for the most part willing to give this game a fair shot. But when they get their hands on it, one campaign crashes during cutscenes and the other is padded by infinite skirmishes, and also crashes randomly. When planes hit the field, they spaz out, and when they leave, the icon stays on screen for a long time. The automatic base building will sometimes break, towing does not work, there's placeholder icons everywhere, the TAC map is basically unusable. It's a mess. Okay, Relic, we all see you've released way earlier than you should have. Blame the publisher if you must, it's fine. Just tell us you're fixing these obvious bugs and adding missing features. Ah, see? Relic just announced Operation Sapphire Jackal. In gaming terms, Operation is not just a patch, it implies content. Look at all these campaign units sitting in the game files ready to be added. That's the way you win back players after a rocky launch, and when the day comes, it's the in-game store for skins. And the way you get these skins is by using in-game currency only purchasable through these mobile game-esque bundles. Best value? Think of all the mud brown camos I could buy, or maybe even Winter Tundra? Half of the maps are in southern Italy and the other half are in North Africa. What tundra? I guess Hans got lost on his way to Stalingrad. I heard about global warming, but this is ridiculous. From that point, any goodwill left was gone and it took a year and a half to slowly rebuild it. Right now, we have a proper replay system, spectator mode, and the option to surrender. Finally, what would Company of Heroes be without teammates trying to surrender every time a game is not won within 5 minutes? They did eventually add content, one new battle group for each faction. You can buy them with merit, a free currency awarded for completing challenges. These challenges started unreasonably grindy, but they're in a good place now, much less specific and quicker to get. Between launch and now, Relic became an independent studio. Now they don't have Sega to blame. Any future failure or success is their own. For the anniversary, they made 4 new battle groups and are selling them exclusively on the Steam store as a DLC. I will talk more about the content later, but I want to say this was not a good decision. Yes, game developers need to eat, but look at this from the perspective of an active player. Not counting hotfixes, we get balance changes every 4 months. The game is far from being bug-free, we'll get to that, you're still peddling this fucking in-game currency while offering people terrible skins and nothing else. The merit system is the healthiest one, it's fair and it keeps people playing, enticing them with more content. Meanwhile, paywalling incentivizes power creep, discourages the nerfing of broken things out of fear that the DLC might receive negative reviews, and makes players who don't want to buy the DLC feel left out, giving them a reason to play something else instead. Ideally, new content would always be free and always available to everyone, but obviously devs have to profit when they make new things. So why not sell cosmetics that people actually want to buy? Instead of mud brown engineers, sell historical skins. Bring back victory strikes and sell those. You're already redoing voiceovers, so make and sell announcer packs. Using my impressive double-digit IQ, I can already tell you that people will see the King Tiger being locked behind a paywall and not bother with the game. Now let's talk about gameplay a bit more in depth. Let's start with the new things that CoH3 introduces, beginning with the new quality of life changes. There's a line of sight indicator, off-map abilities are now team colored, their flares are now color coded from avoid if possible to move or everything dies. There's auto-reinforce, a feature that we had in Dawn of War 1 but not the other company of heroes, and hotkeys are finally remindable. For general gameplay, side armor makes vehicle micro more impactful and flanking tanks more consistent. Height advantage makes your units more accurate if they're shooting at lower targets. It's a tool for map design, it can be good or bad depending on how it's implemented, but objectively the more uneven the ground, the more chances for fuck-ups. There's auto-vaulting, so you don't need to click individual fences and sandbags to move over them. And then there's breaching. I'll save it for the bugs section. Having 4 factions at launch was great, but it highlights that the game being set on the Italian and North African fronts was probably a decision that came later in development. The US and Wehrmacht factions could be their Normandy counterparts and nothing would change. There's some anachronisms in their equipment, but it's nothing compared to the Brits having a Churchill Black Prince. If you don't know, only one was made and it was a prototype, ready well after the North African campaign was over. It's cool to see earlier tech that usually gets overshadowed by late war hardware, but CoH3's implementation will not please tank autism. By design, there is always going to be a gamey element in how things are represented. The Stuart was slightly more armored than the Crusader, but the Crusader is bigger, therefore it's a medium tank and the Stuart is a light tank. The Stug was made to engage all targets, but long gun plus casemate equals tank destroyer when gamey logic is applied. They do a decent job of finding a middle ground for most units. Assault guns are usually anti-tank units with anti-infantry abilities. The Stummel and League could both be used in a direct fire role, so both get a direct fire ability. The most puzzling is the M24 Chaffee. This was a light tank using the same cannon as the Sherman. In game, however, it's a small tank destroyer, a Diet M18. Company of Heroes never had a focus on historical accuracy or anything. I just find it a bizarre choice when this role would have fit the Crusader perfectly. The Crusader 2 was fast, barely armored, it had a smaller gun than other mediums in the game, and crucially it was never issued HE shells. It would have been perfect for this role. I might be the only person bothered by this. Factions! US first. US has the highest number of viable openings. Your initial encounter with a US player might feature rifles, pathfinders, assault engineers, jeeps, weasels, bazooka squads, or a machine gun. It seems to me that US is all about cost-efficient units that can be masked and improved in different ways. Their mainline riflemen start the game on top of the food chain and they can get bars, grenades, a cheaper reinforcement cost, the ability to plant mines or demo charges, and more health. In the same way, the Sherman is a fine medium tank that can get its armor and gun upgraded. Or they can go for the doctrinal Easy 8 Shermans, which are the best medium tanks right out of the box. Their weakness is that reaching max tier in a timely manner means skipping lower tiers, sacrificing options, and upgrading your units requires fuel, so there's an opportunity cost. They also require specific battle groups to get specialized units like artillery, elite infantry, and heavy tanks. Another Another thing to mention is the support centers. There are 3 of them and you need to choose one in order to tech up. The air support center gives you airstrikes and a recon plane. The mechanized one gives you vehicle upgrades and a repair station. The last one gives you infantry upgrades and a captain. I don't want to talk about balance right now, but I do want to show you the M3 half track and its variants. One is the quad mount that can do this. And that's funny. The other one is the 75mm gun motor carriage. This used to be a weak stopgap anti-tank unit, but now it has an HE barrage with an ungodly amount of range and a Vet 1 ability that makes it always penetrate targets while disabling their weapons. A lot of units have similar single shot abilities, but until the anniversary the GMC would do this for every shot fired during the ability's duration. It countered Tigers. Their counterpart is the Wehrmacht. Wehrmacht starts with equally expensive but weaker infantry than the Allies, making up for it through their utility since they can build cover, heal up in the field and transfer men into more important squads. After the early game you need to decide between a split in the tech tree, either the Panzer Grenadier or the Luftwaffe company. Each give you competent infantry, team weapons and a light vehicle. Then with a side tech you unlock further anti-tank or anti-infantry units. When you finish taking up, you get Stoss troops, Panzer Force and Brumbars. Eventually, you will have a strong front line of units plus the utility of grenadiers keeping infantry in the fight and building cover. Thanks to the Coastal Battle Group, they're the designated SimCity faction. The battle group allows you to spawn coastal reserves. This reincarnation of the Osttruppen from CoH2 is not just cheap fodder. They can fortify the line with a ton of bunkers, which eventually become self-healing and self-constructing. SimCities only really work in team games or when people don't know how to deal with them, but man is it fun to play Transport Tycoon Deluxe while spectating your opponent playing Company of Heroes. Just know that off-map abilities will eventually undo your efforts. Brits are the simplest faction. They're built around versatility. From the start they can go for competent close-range infantry, long-range infantry, a light vehicle or a machine gun. Their mainline infantry has 3 different upgrades to suit different situations. Due to their linear tech structure, they always have all the tools they could need available to them without requiring a doctrine. When reaching the late game, they have the greatest variety in medium tanks. From max tier, they can also deploy foot guards, elite infantry that can deal with all targets. You also get the ability to refund vehicles, so getting one is not a commitment. For example, you can get a doctrinal centaur tank to bully enemy infantry, and then send it back home once you need the fuel to deal with enemy tanks. Their unique ability is to train their troops.
Training complete. Our infantry will be better prepared.
Last faction is the Deutsche Afrika Korps. DAK is a weird faction in a weird state. Their infantry is expensive and not always performing for their cost. They're often outnumbered and outgunned. Any losses means extra manpower bleed, potentially trapping you in a spiral where you keep replacing men and can't afford new units to retake the field. Their strength is in mobile and highly specialized units that can quickly be where they need to be and go from capping them up to concentrating firepower into isolated units. They have a lot of good vehicles that hit the field fast, and careless positioning when they're deployed can result in a squad wipe. They are all about combined arms, except not in the tactical sense, but because units need their emotional support vehicle to hit something. All of their basic infantry can repair vehicles, and with a battle group they can salvage wrecks to alleviate the resource situation. Alternatively, the recovery truck can restore the charred carcasses of vehicles back to operating status. This includes allied and enemy units. Their vehicle-heavy play is assisted by a variety of purchasable upgrades that crucially don't cost any fuel. Tanks will be able to pop smoke, capture points,
We have capture orders. A little unorthodox.
self-repair, have increased vision and get tungsten shells for better penetration on their gun. The reason why I say they're weird is that they are the designated Fast and Furious faction, flanking AT guns and punishing bad positioning, but sometimes they're the blob and kill everything faction. That's because they have accuracy bonuses that can be given to the entirety of your army by a single unit. You're incentivized to keep everything together. And then they're also the vehicle spam faction. weapon. All vehicles in the game get much better when massed, but thanks to their upgrades, DAC does not need as much infantry support. If you do have a bunch of infantry, that's even better, because that means you can trade damage with your vehicles and repair them in seconds. And on top of everything, they always have the option to get a Tiger out. Despite having all of these different strats, their units are often specialized, expensive, fragile, or all of the above. To me, it feels like they rely on being the aggressor and having good tempo more than any other faction. It's hard to recover from losses, and the longer the game goes on, the harder it will be to use your specialized vehicles against a well-built general-purpose army. Unique to them are these non-doctrinal call-ins that immediately deploy your choice of unit with a free half-track. Good for the emergency anti-tank duty, or if you need an assault grenadier squad for an all-out push. You can then upgrade this system to deliver armor instead, which is how you get the Tiger.
We have been granted a Tiger 1, Commandant.
And finally we get to the new DLC content. It's 4 battle groups focused on heavy tanks. I remember seeing a lot of people asking for more heavies, so this DLC should be a crowd pleaser. Or if you're cynical, it's made to be meta in 4v4 games. Anyway, US heavy weapons. This battle group has a bizarre mix of team weapon improvements, a focus on half-tracks and an heavy tank. It doesn't help a ton in the early game, and assault half-tracks are not a game changer. But in the late game, your team weapons will get much better. You get an heavy AT gun, which is a fine unit, but I have to take issue with its HE barrage ability. It's not super strong, but every other heavy AT gun got its anti-infantry damage completely removed, so I don't understand why this unit has to break the mold, besides the obvious reasons. The main draw is getting the Pershing. This heavy might be my favorite. The rate of fire becomes insane at max veterancy, and it's also the most maneuverable of the heavy tanks. It does not have as much armor as the Tiger, but as long as you play intelligently, speed equals survivability and being able to chase slower enemy armor. Wehrmacht Terror. You start with free camouflage for your machine guns, which is a nice counter to high vision units. The King Tiger is reached a little faster than the regular Tiger, which makes it the better one to rush. I don't have too much to say about it. It's a slightly better, slower Tiger that also halves your fuel income and takes less damage from the front. Solid, but after playing with the Pershing, it feels unbearably slow. The rest of the battle group gives you bonuses for being around suppressed or retreating units. And then there's the V1 rocket. We're back to the breaking conventions problem. This ability is the only off-map strike without warning flares. It's going to be less effective as people get used to it, but there's no reason for this other than power creep. In the gameplay video they say that it's okay because of its distinguished sound cue, and then when trying to get footage of it, knowing it was coming, they miss it anyway.
The observer.
Oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Next, UK Canadians. This battle group is the odd one out. You get Canadian shock troops, which are an expensive but solid anti-everything squad. You get bonuses for decapping enemy territory, and also you get a boost to grenade damage with a flaming array of effect, and every flame weapon will slow down enemy units. All of this comes into play fairly quickly, and the Crocodile tank is not as expensive or heavy as the other heavy tanks in this DLC. It's a good unit, but in team games you'd be better off getting a Black Prince or some archers. I just wish it was easier to get the flame projector pointing where you want to. Last, DAC Panzerjäger command. Roadblocks seem silly, but I'm sure there's some cancer strat waiting to be found. S-mines are hilarious. They're great for choke points, and if a retreating unit goes on them, it's a guaranteed wipe. Some people have been complaining about the Panzerjägers being overpriced and underwhelming, and now with this DLC you can upgrade them to tank busters. They're a better anti-tank tank unit but not exactly amazing, and they're fairly priced at 80 munitions, which makes me so annoyed that it isn't a normal upgrade and instead requires a battle group. Or you could go for a passive that brings back grenade launcher spam. And finally we get to the elephant, which the duck never used. An elephant in North Africa? What is this, the Battle of Zama? What a terrible choice. Duck can get a tiger much faster than the elephant, and while the tiger is an anchor that you can play around, the elephant is a slow defenseless unit that needs to be guarded. Technically you can get both, giving Duck double the heavy tanks, but in my opinion you would help the team more by massing walking Stukas. And that's the battle groups. I will say more about the patch itself later. For now I'll just mention that they changed more sound effects, the whole US announcer, some icons, and they added more music. Segue to presentation. Presentation has always been a strong point in Relic games, but CoH3 took a while to get there. Visual, sound effects and the UI all improved since launch. Infantry skins don't help, not all look terrible, but they break the color scheme of factions and in general units look mismatched. Despite making so many skins, the Guastatori, which were clearly made to be Wehrmacht units, never got a sandy camo to make them fit in with the Desert Pride Parade. Voice acting is pretty good. There's voice lines for new mechanics.
Bastards! They above us! Fire back! Take an inch on the flank!
And for some commands which didn't have any before.
Back up! Move!
Gunner! Hold it! Clear to engage! Shifting to prioritize vehicles! Fire on anything that's not ours!
Also for planes.
I see no double shoots behind me, transporting now. Say your prayers, boys! Time to go!
It wasn't necessary and maybe they talk too much, but it's a nice touch.
JU-87, enter interface, in motion, MPs at launch. You're depleted, healing out.
Another cool addition is the announcer calling out specific enemy kills.
The Tiger Terror is no more.
The British Black Prince burn! A 76mm Sherman has been crushed! German officer killed!
There's plenty of voice lines living rent-free in my head.
Anyone can do it, but we'll do it better!
My men need challenges, not medals!
Into the jaws of death, Fallschirmjäger!
Combat patrol! We're already in combat!
Into the jaws of Fallschirmjäger!
Those troopers will learn we are Gorkali!
That does it. I am retiring. Again.
Come on, you pensioner!
The Kriegsmarine is looking like a sweet deal now, huh?
And word, over.
Well, aren't we a sight for sore eyes?
Spandau, fire it! At me!
She can take it!
I hope they didn't hit something important!
Weasel by name, weasel by nature.
We've done the devil proud!
Tiger! Tiger! Engaging!
That last one lives in my head for the wrong reasons.
Tiger! Look at them run!
One glaring omission is vehicles missing a callout for explosives being thrown at them now that grenades and satchels are able to outright kill some of them. The music does its job, but it pales in comparison to the best tracks from the original. Speaking of paling in comparison to the original, the campaigns. People have called the main Italy campaign Total War style, but you have nowhere near the amount of freedom, options or synergy between campaign choices and the battles. The Italy campaign was the devs' attempt at making a modular, replayable, complex campaign with a lot of freedom and a lot of strategic assets to use. Combat on the campaign map follows a rock-paper-scissors rule with artillery, infantry and armored companies. There's defensive emplacements around the map, dealing damage to your companies as they try advancing. You're meant to scout using recon planes, other companies or partisan assets to see what you're running into, and then destroy them with artillery, flanking attacks or air power. In practice, the whole strategic layer is a disappointment. You could requisition more bombers, battleships and artillery, but fire support is bottlenecked by ammunition. I don't think I ever got bombed in the whole campaign, and enemy ships attacked me once under the cover of my coastal batteries and died right away. Partisans act from hideouts, and their most powerful ability is one that lets you capture unguarded towns automatically. This will starve out emplacements and confuse the already struggling enemy AI. When fighting over a town, you play a real-time mission or a generic skirmish. Each company has different unlocked units and can choose abilities as they level up. Strategic assets affect these missions if they're in range, giving you bombing runs, naval bombardments, stolen supply drops from the partisans, or unique help from neighboring companies. Maybe it's because I played at max difficulty, but the counters get kind of ridiculous and it hurts variety. I like that I cannot attack with this thing, because the second I move I get hit by either an infantry company, which apparently is the tank destroyer of this magical alternative history universe. US Special Forces companies feel like the only ones worth getting. They're cheap to recruit, counter enemy armor, and perform the best during real-time combat. Let's talk about it. At launch, every time companies met, you were forced to do a skirmish, and this meant you had to play several of them every turn. Now real-time combat only happens around certain locations, either making you fight a skirmish or a scripted mission designed to be played with any of the available companies, which means they're all bland and often barely related to what's happening on the campaign map.
Oh, come on! The Germans are blowing up the bridges! Fly route back up and running. Good work, man. Remind me to have a chat with McKay. We probably could have just gone around this bridge.
You don't even get unique characters for what you're using. There's a US captain giving the briefing and then he passes command to a corporal. This means that technically the player is that corporal, as well as the guy controlling assets for the whole theater. As for the gameplay, the missions aren't amazing. Part of what made the original campaigns fun is that the levels were tailor-made to the player's faction and given company. Urban level? Flame tanks. Panther level? M10s. Trying to make levels work for all companies in both factions means that they're all kind of the same. There's a lot of them with enemies scripted to stand their ground until they die, and many end with a German counterattack making you kill a certain number of tanks before it's over. One defense mission shakes things up by making you kill a single command tank with a lot of HPs, but then it drives to the building you need to defend and shoots your infantry instead. The scripting for this mission is literally just tank move here, done. The old balance doesn't help with how dull they are. Since launch, the skirmish and multiplayer version of units had their time to kill tweaked to make the game feel better, and that's not present here. Infantry takes forever to kill or suppress. That's why I said that the Special Forces company is the better one. It's got commandos. White Phosphorus kills infantry fast, and they got Zooks for the myriad of tanks you'll have to destroy. The repetitiveness gets especially bad in skirmishes. There's several types. Some are very short defensive missions, other are normal ones with very minor twists and maybe a secondary objective. Because of how many enemies they start with, you're kind of forced to play them the exact same way too. At one point, the Anzio landing happens without your input.
Sir, the landings have started at Anzio, but we should bring another company onto the beach to ensure we capture the port as quickly as possible.
The bombing of Monte Cassino is also a timed event that you're supposed to avoid by attacking early.
I've bought us some time, and if we can capture Monte Cassino soon, there'll be no need for the raid.
The loss of the Abbey would be devastating, sir.
The Allies are planning to bomb Monte Cassino. The Abbey is an essential part of Italy's cultural heritage.
Little side note, this wasn't controversial because a building got destroyed, but because the Abbey was effectively neutral ground, only occupied by civilians until it got reduced to rubble. They didn't want players to miss out on these battles, so they made these events. Understandable, but besides contradicting that you're in command of all allied assets, it goes to show that the campaign map does a bad job representing this front. Instead of a showcase of the most important battles, we get the freedom of moving a handful of companies around the map and triggering generic missions or mind-dulling skirmishes. You can paradrop companies onto objectives, land troops on occupied ports, defend defend a town from a counterattack, and all you'll get is yet another skirmish. There's nothing wrong with skirmishes in your campaign, but you need to pace them properly. Maybe don't spawn 5 different companies out of nowhere to attack the player one after the other. The final mission is about breaking the winter line, and unbeknownst to me, it turns out that the main method of player judgment is loyalty with the leaders under your command. You have an American general, a British general, and woman. They have things that they like or dislike. For example, the partisans don't like it when you bomb Italian towns, unlike in the trailer, but keeping them all happy means slowing down the campaign and solving their riddles.
Sir, this conflict is beginning to take its inevitable toll on our men. There is a growing desire for some kind of respite.
If you need a hand motivating your men, Clarence, you just let me know.
You're given the choice of what to prioritize, but making Norton happy means delaying yourself from capturing the closer objectives. Besides, based Bakram likes when I actually use my strategic assets instead of wasting turn after turn sieging towns. During the final mission, since I only had his loyalty, the others decided to not show up at all, and then the cutscene said,
Commander never did work out how to get Buckram and Norton to get along. I heard he got shipped back home to teach kindergartners or something.
oh fuck you game. There is some replayability in the sense that you might not get every mission in one playthrough, but you can play them from the mission selection screen anyway. This one didn't trigger for me. You play as a single Stuart going around killing stuff. In a more linear game, I could see something like this functioning as a tutorial for tanks. It teaches newbies that they don't need to be too afraid of anti-tank units as long as they micro their vehicle properly. Aside from maybe a couple other levels, everything else is basically the same. All in all, I can see people having fun painting them up at a lower difficulty, but in narrative, mission design and meta strategy elements, this is a mediocre campaign. So I recorded this segment before the update, and it turns out that they're also updating the campaign. God bless them for trying. Highlights include adding the new heavy tanks for free, more skirmish maps for variety, specializing the various companies a bit more, and adding more skirmishes.
So we added these attack waves in. They could kind of spawn from any territory. They could have like an attack wave of like 4 units spawn in there and then just start like wreaking havoc.
Sure, it might be a smidge better, but as a single player centerpiece for a strategy game, this campaign is fundamentally broken. It's not memorable, it's not interesting, missions are the most generic they've been in CoH history, the pacing is awful, and it's not even a good tutorial. If you only care about skirmishes in a strategy game, then I suppose you could enjoy this, but even then I think you'd be more interested in playing custom games with mods. For example, the Advanced AI mod has a bunch of options to make things more chaotic or difficult, as well as a game mode where you don't even need to micro. It's commendable that they haven't abandoned the Italy campaign, and it's hard to be objective when skirmishes aren't my cup of tea, but I cannot recommend this campaign over a Total War or a Grand Strategy game or even Dark Crusade. Then there's the Duck campaign. You follow Rommel from his first engagement in North Africa to the Battle of El Alamein, commanding German and Italian troops as you push the Brits all the way to Egypt.
It is time they learn to never take their eyes off Deutsches Afrika Korps. Panzers, with me! Push forward!
An Axis campaign in the current year? How based? The campaign roughly follows real battles, with Rommel being the main narrator, giving epic speeches every time he can.
As you can see, we are surrounded by British mines in almost every direction. That is good. It means we are not surrounded by British troops, and they won't dare cross the field. But we do. Today we have proven our tactical superiority to the British, and Berlin will recognize our strategic brilliance. We are now on equal grounds! Let us prove to the British who has the armored superiority on the field of battle! Our prodigal vanguard returns. If even a sandstorm couldn't break us apart, what hope could the enemy have? We make our stand together!
Then, after every mission, the perspective switches to the disembodied voice of a random Jewish local who joins the British army. So Rommel will go on and on about what a great feat they have accomplished by winning, and then the guy goes, "Oh no, we can't stop Rommel, we're so sad, just like the people of Benghazi." And then the perspective switches again to his daughter. She resides in this amateurly drawn and awfully animated hellscape. Her story fucking sucks, and it's told in very annoying small bits. They get bombed by the Desert Air Force, then the Germans take some people away, and then she blows up a truck. Her mother takes the blame and gets shot.
Great. Who cares? Who gives a shit about that?
The father doesn't really have a story. He complains that he won the mission and passes the mic to his daughter. That's it. At one point he says,
"In early July, Australian forces attacked an intelligence outpost that had been relaying every detail of British troop movements to the Germans. Rommel's reputation had grown larger than the man himself, but now the Allies had finally solved the mystery of his apparent genius."
To simplify the matter, the Rommel myth refers to his almost mythical reputation stemming mostly from British cope. If you wanted to dispel this myth, why have a level where he drives a tiger and wins a battle by himself? It's double retarded because Rommel is the player. Why are you telling players that they don't deserve their victories? Clearly someone cobbled together a campaign and then someone else decided to rush this dogshit story and make that the main narrative for PC reasons. And what's infuriating is that they didn't need to, just add 3 or 4 levels playing as the Brits. It will give the player more content and make the campaign neutral in a way that this trash could never accomplish. It could even end with an Operation Torch level linking up with the Italy campaign. Between the layoffs and going independent, maybe whoever demanded these cutscenes isn't working on the game anymore. If that's the case, the obvious fix would be to remove them. I know somebody got paid for them, but the art looks like shit, the animation looks like shit, the story is shit, and most importantly it's such a tonal whiplash from "Yay, I beat the mission" to "Oh no, Rommel won the mission, and my daughter is arguing with her mom."
We have gained not only a valuable harbor with precious supplies, but also the upper hand on this entire theater. A monumental victory.
By the time Rommel reached Tobruk, we were at our breaking point.
The cutscenes ruin an otherwise perfectly fine side campaign. Talk about snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. Gameplay wise, the levels are okay. The ones where you're assaulting defensive positions are fine, I guess. The only interesting level is the one where you need to defend and escort to safety signal vehicles. Basically, you have a limited amount of resources and you have to decide between splitting them to cover several objectives or do them individually. After a while, the main British force arrives and threatens to cut off your retreat. They're easy to kill, but I like the concept. The campaign in general does a great job implementing salvage and recovery in most missions. It's a nice way for attentive players to get extra resources, but because of the pop cap, the recovery track itself or even the medical track are not worth it. Instead, the only population efficient strategy is to spam medium tanks. All things considered, I would say that this campaign is worth a playthrough. Just do yourself a favor and skip the cutscenes.
You there, girl. Come here.
Besides dealing with bugs, the community had to endure many balance blunders. For example, when L6 tanks demolished all targets with their base guns, when packs of M1340s would dominate the battlefield, the patch where US players would build 8 chaffies and drive them in your base, or when training gave Brits 30% extra damage. My favorite to illustrate Relic's weak grasp on the game's balance is this one. Once upon a time, UK players noticed that they could go for Royal Engineers instead of infantry sections. They are cheaper and come from the HQ, you could get a bunch of them and rush training. This would make them better in combat and unlock their grenades. It was a build that gave you early map control but suffered against light vehicle rushes. Strong but not unbeatable. Some people were clamoring for a major nerf. nerf, but in my opinion what they should have done is tweak it slightly. Just a minor nerf, because it wasn't really the unit that was broken but this doctrinal ability that cheapens the life of your otherwise balanced Welshman. So which one did they go with? Major nerf or minor nerf? They got a buff! Relic usually takes a while to address overpowered units, but this was so terrible that it lasted 1 day, and then they got a lot of people mad by applying sledgehammer balance to pretty much the entirety of the British faction. Although I will say that the player base as a whole will never be happy with the state of the game. That's just a side effect of asymmetry, the many differences between game modes, and the unit balance being based on power spikes. The impact of a unit is determined by their stats and their timing. You're not meant to always have the perfect answer to whatever enemy unit comes out, unless you've made good use of your own power spikes to secure a significant fuel advantage. This is a simplification. The way you play matters as much as what units you're getting. There's randomness involved in a lot of fights, stealing enemy weapons might let you come back, your opponent might lose a unit to a lucky mine, but no faction should have an almost insurmountable advantage at the very start of the game, and cheap, versatile, early hitting vehicles should not outperform expensive specialized ones with worse timing. One of the changes that was universally praised is the time to kill rework. This made being in the open much more deadly. There was a point where everyone was attack moving machine guns. Now an MG in the open dies very quickly to infantry in cover, unless they have 30% damage resistance for no fucking reason. Machine guns are very tricky to balance. Without them, there's nothing stopping people from keeping their units in a massive blob, aside from artillery. But logically, if an MG can deal with 5 units, they can also deal with 1 while being substantially easier to use than they are to counter. Fun fact, US can start the game by parachuting an MG on your fuel point and getting in a building to guard it. I think you generally shouldn't be able to paradrop units in the fog of war without some drawbacks, but specifically letting players do it at the very beginning of the game, it's not a great idea. Not because it's overpowered, in fact in most of my footage aggressive drops fail catastrophically, and you could argue that it makes the early game more varied, but I would bet money that these openings filtered a lot of new players. I will say, however, that it can be painful to deal with paradropped machine guns, specifically when playing DAC in team games. Team game maps cramp everyone together, each player fighting over much less ground. It becomes impossible to go around team weapons. DAC does not have access to a conventional infantry mortar. It can be annoying to dislodge an early drop. But hey, if you buy the DLC, you can do this. Let's talk about team games now. I very much prefer 1v1s. I like knowing that any mistake is my own and positioning is much more important. It's also simpler to mentally keep track of enemy units and predict what's coming out next. In team games, however, players kind of have to concentrate their armies. There's nowhere else to go and it becomes this static tangle of team weapons, artillery and heavy tanks poking at each other. Last patch gave the Vespe and the Walking Stuka an extra barrage with a separate cooldown to their main one. Good luck winning the artillery war against that. Despite all of this, I like them. They're much more spammy and chaotic, but they can go south very fast if you get focused by several players or if a teammate rage quits. Fucking team down, noob, team noob, down, noob, fucking down, team noob, my... I usually try going for silly memes like spamming semoventes or building the Maginot line or going artillery only. Some abilities become very strong when chained, like the one that shoots uncounterable vision flares over your territory, and any ability that gives vision synergizes well with 4 players worth of artillery. Because of all these combos, potential player coordination, different map design and different army compositions, team games actually require different game sense and knowledge compared to 1v1s. It's cool that if I get tired of a game mode I can switch to another one and have a completely completely different experience. You could be the funny man spamming funny tanks, but it's not only memes. If you want to, you can get good at them. Just don't expect random players to be very cooperative. Here's some problems that are yet to be fixed. There's a bug where explosive kills aren't awarded properly. Cringers cringed away. So affected units level up much slower. There's a bug where sometimes when using the duck smoke launchers, the smoke doesn't feel like it. Where's my smoke, dude? Game said no. Game said no smoke. When Duck recovers enemy tanks, they get the benefit of all the upgrades, except they don't self-repair. And finally, there's breaching. Say you need to get an enemy out of a building and you only have an infantry squad. You could toss a grenade, but a good player can dodge it and hop right back in. So what do? You breach. When breaching, your units do this neat animation where they line up on the door, toss a grenade and get trapped forever. When it works, it forces the enemy out and your units in. Besides being broken, it's very niche. Breaching units take a lot of damage while they wait for the grenade to go off, and the enemy can simply exit and shoot. Pathfinding has been massively improved since launch. Then they broke it again. Look at this pathfinding, what? How is this the fastest way to get here? Everyone playing on this patch has heaps of stories about pathfinding screwing up. I'm going to fucking scream. For the anniversary, they reverted to a previous version which is less unpredictable but still flawed. Technically an improvement, but it means that we've gone months without progress. Some units still have awkward or useless abilities, despite similar ones having gotten a rework already. The Stug has a short-range ability that makes it shoot HE shells. Instead of being a toggle that changes its ammo and shortens its range, you have to click on a specific target and the ability will interrupt if the Stug is given any new order. I've had success with it, it's not weak, just clunky and inconsistent. Another weird ability is the Panzer Pious stun grenade. Why would I want my units to have a regular grenade when they can get this fucking thing instead? It can slow down retreating enemies, but only if they aren't retreating already. And the last problem I want to talk about is the small but not insignificant amount of cheaters. They seem to be more active in team games, and the easiest way to spot them is to check the saved camera positions in the replay. If a camera is higher than it should be, that means the player is using a map hack. Report them and they might get banned. But while we're on camera cheats, this zoom level is functional and doesn't even look bad. Why is the normal zoom so limited? How come only cheaters get to have a decent view of the battlefield? Imagine a shooter that forces your FOV to 50 because it's more cinematic. That's what Relic is doing. We have the technology to see the whole battlefield, but much like 19 years ago, the best way to keep an eye on everything is to use the tactical map. And look how slow it can get. Before the conclusion, let me touch on the newest patch. The most bizarre change is that they removed the ability to build things while capturing. It's not the worst thing ever, it makes it so defenses and mines are not always concentrated on the capture points, but I would say it removes an element of skill expression. Then there's the bugs. One game my units got stuck on nothing. Another game the enemy picked up a 17-pounder, but not the crew. And my favorite one, the UK base howitzer hitting itself. Oh, and they were going to be buffing the semovente, but they nerfed it. Sure, it's 20 manpower cheaper and the lower but flat penetration might actually help a little bit, but the barrage is now useless. The rate of fire is faster, but it went from an ability that could deal with infantry with some timing to something that's only going to tickle them unless they stand still for the whole duration of the barrage. The semovente has mediocre range, bad accuracy, it's a bit overpriced, and 3 command points are a bit too late to make it your main anti-tank unit. Nothing of what they changed was even remotely the problem with this unit, and now they've made the anti-infantry component utter trash. How is this a buff? Relic, play your game, please. Concluding, I will say that CoH3 was always going to fight an uphill battle. Real-time strategy is a declining genre and RTS discourse has long been poisoned by people who don't play it anymore. Obviously, if modern RTS games were better, this would be less of a problem. There is a ton of valid criticism to be made, but when you see arguments like this one, yeah, CoH3 has the better looking models, which are the only ones not wearing pajamas and featuring a loader, but the idle animation is stiffer, so game sucks. Sorry. I'm not saying that details don't matter, we should expect a certain level of quality in all aspects of the game. I just find it very odd that every other genre has people recommending the classics for their gameplay, while supposed RTS fans get so hung up about minute cosmetic aspects. And guess what? CoH3 is actually good. Yeah, this may be a surprise, but I really enjoy the game. It's fun to outplay your opponent in a tight match. It's fun to partake in endless artillery spam. It's fun to perfectly read the situation knowing that you're coming out on top. And so is winning a game by lucky wipes or a desperate VP hold. It's a fun game, screwed over by a pendulum of bad balance, stubborn bugs, slow updates, and an incredibly autistic community. Mr. Advertiser, get down! A top-ranked player would probably be much more annoyed at bad balance, but on my part, while getting footage for the review, I kept getting fun games. I played all factions in all sorts of different ways and game modes, seriously trying to win, messing around with stupid strats, or trying to get a specific unit to work. Company of Heroes 3 is a divisive sequel and a flawed product, but it is a good strategy game. Is it worth buying over the other two? Well, the first game is better for PvE, no questions about that, but when it comes to multiplayer, I feel like CoH3 is the easiest to recommend. It has the most quality of life features, it's the only one still being worked on, it has way more players than CoH1 and faster queues than CoH2 because of random faction selection. Considering the lack of any significant innovation, if you've been perfectly happy playing the other two games until now, I don't see a reason to switch over. But even then, there's no harm in trying it out. I'm a bit uncertain about the future of the game. The general atmosphere at the moment is positive because people are excited for new content, and the DLC has made some 4v4 matches pretty exciting. But there's a not so great precedent being set here. How am I meant to recommend this game in good faith when at any point Relic could make pay-to-win DLCs and hold the meta hostage? If you're interested, the game has gotten free weekends before, so maybe wait for one of those, or get it during a sale since the complete package is now more expensive. I'm hoping that paywalling will not be the norm, especially considering that some of the future content might be recycled campaign units. But for the moment, one DLC is tolerable. Almost forgot, the console version has been abandoned, so don't buy that. Part of me wants to make fun of people who thought it was a good idea to play a real-time strategy game on a controller, but clearly they didn't know any better and it's not their fault that Relic has abandoned them. I don't think they offered any sort of compensation. The least they could do is give people Steam keys, it doesn't cost them anything. And that's everything. Company of Heroes 3 is not a perfect game. The single player is mediocre to play, the story is forgettable.
You could convince the Navy to bring one of their ships to Barletta. He could rustle us up some ice cream.
Patches has so far done a poor job at making all factions fun to play in every matchup, and despite the many bug fixes, there's still the occasional one that persists. But it's nowhere near as bad as the online discourse around it makes it out to be. As long as you know what to expect, it can be a lot of fun. Thanks for watching. Yeah, get knifed.